Hello, my name is Michael Green, and I welcome you to the 32nd episode of my podcast, Historians in Conversation, which is hosted by the University of Lodz in Poland. My guest today is Dr. Kazimierz Bem, who was born in the city of Lodz, where I currently work, and he is specialist on both law but also early modern religious history. His career path took him all the way from Poland to the United States. And today I would be talking to him about him becoming a pastor rather than a professor, and how he manages to combine his interest in history with pastoral duties. I welcome Kazimierz to my podcast, and I hope that you enjoy the conversation. Hello, Kazimierz, and welcome to my podcast. I'm very glad that you have agreed to talk to me. We've known each other for, I think, at least 10 years remotely, and it's the first time that we actually have a chance to have a real conversation. So I'm very glad to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Well, I think that one of the most interesting thing about you is that you're not only a researcher but a pastor. And we will get to that point later. But let us start with my traditional question about your background. Please tell us a little bit about your childhood, your family. Where do you come from?
So I am a child of Łódź and a very proud child of Łódź. I have not, apart from Amsterdam, I have not seen a better city in the whole wild world. Maybe Trondheim in Norway, but it's really Łódź and Amsterdam. So I was born in Łódź, and my family, both my mom's and my dad's
Poland, maybe we
Łódź,
should
Poland, of
specify.
course. Well,
Yes.
of course. You're right. So my mom's and my dad's family have lived here probably since the 1880s. And in the area, my mom's family, well, quite a while, and my dad's family probably since the early 19th century. So I was born in Łódź, I was brought up in Łódź, and then my parents were academics. My dad at the Politechnika Łódzka, my mom at the Akademia Medyczna.
So which Polytechnical University and which Medical Academy?
Medical Academy. And then we moved to Canada for a while. We came back. And then just before communism fell, we moved to Kuwait, where I lived 1 year before the invasion, the first Gulf War, and then 1 year after. My dad and my mom returned. I was sent to a boarding school in England. And then I came back to Kuwait. Then I came back to Poland. I finished 26 liceum. 26 high school, yes. The best high school in Łódź, believe it or not, where incidentally, my brother studied there. So there's a funny story about that somewhere hidden. And then I've got into the University of Łódź, Uniwersytet Łódzki, for the faculty of law.
Where I work at the moment, yes.
Yes, exactly. So this is another plug-in at the Faculty of Law, and I graduated in 2001, I believe, and then I went to Amsterdam to do my PhD in refugee law. So,
but let us first stop with your childhood.
Yes.
Or stop at your childhood and delve a little bit deeper into it. So what you describe is quite a fascinating story. Moving from Poland all the way to Canada and then to Kuwait and then back here and then back to Kuwait and then back to Poland. It must have been quite an interesting journey. So let us slow down for a moment and try to reflect a little bit about you as you. So we see little Kaz growing in the city of Łódź. What were you interested in? Because, well, maybe for our listeners, I have to mention that the city of Łódź, or Lodz in English, had quite a reputation back in the day of being not an extremely high society city, having certain levels of crime, especially in some neighborhoods, and practically was a city where there were a lot of people who were simply working at various factories.
Yeah. So I think that's a very Warsaw-centric opinion, because when you talk to people from Warsaw, you never hear about Praga, which is like a dump. I mean, it was and is a dump to this day. But like all these intellectuals from Warsaw always had this opinion that we'd come to Łódź and commiserate, with the working class people. Well, which is very, which was quite diverse. Yes, you did have Bałuty, you did have some bad neighborhoods. We lived in, I mean, when I was born, my parents moved into Polesche, which was quite a nice area. And it's interesting because we recently found an application my parents filled in for a larger apartment to the communist authorities. And it lists my mom and it says, it says like Eva Bem, applicant, Henry Bem, husband, Gregory Bem, son, and then plus one pregnancy. I'm not making this up because you had to justify why you would need another room because there's another child on the way. But which I grew up in was, it was quite green. Yes, it did have a large contingent of working class people. There were mainly women, which is why it probably got screwed over in 1980s during, because, the Polish miners, everybody else got these, generous dismissals. The Polish factory women did not, the włókniarki did not. But one of the things that Warsaw doesn't understand is that which before World War II was 1/3 Jewish, 1/3, I would say, Catholic, and 1/3 roughly a little bit less than a third Protestant.
And Orthodox.
Pardon?
There was also an Orthodox part.
Yeah, but it was not more than 1 or 2%. But my point is, even after World War II, I mean, the Jews were absolutely decimated, but Łódź still had a relatively large surviving Jewish population and a large surviving German, semi-assimilated families. So it wasn't that it was just like an intellectual wasteland, like Warsaw loves to think of us. I think the problem with Łódź is Łódź was always, even recently I had a friend, lovely friend, who came and visited Łódź, and he said, I was walking up and down the street, your main street, Piotrkowska, and when I finally run into a church, it turned out it was a Protestant one. And I'm like, yeah, because Łódź wasn't built around a church, a sanctuary, or a castle. It was built around industry and business. And I think, the Polish, ex-noble, blasé intellectuals, especially the left wings from, or right wing from Warsaw, never could actually assimilate the fact that there was a city that grew so exponentially by attracting different nationalities. There were Czechs, there were German, there were Russians, there were Tatars. Of course, there were Jews, Jewish people who was, identified differently depending, nationality wise, right? And then there were Poles as well. And I think they never got over that. So I don't think so. Which it has that reputation, but it was not. I remember going.
So how was it?
Yeah. Well, no,
how was it for you?
It wasn't an intellectual wasteland. It wasn't a backward place like Warsaw loves to describe us. I remember going to Teatr Wielki, which was fantastic under Pietras. Absolutely fantastic.
The great theater of Łódź, yeah.
Yeah.
So how was it to grow up as a child in the city?
I don't have, so I have memories when we came back from Canada, and it was a little bit, depressing. I think my mom said one of my comments when we came back from Canada in 1980s, 83, my comment was like, why is it so gray, ugly, and it stinks here, and it's so dirty and it stinks here? That was like my perception of communism, but which was, I had a large family that was actually quite mixed, both socioeconomically and stuff. It was the 1980s, so we used to play outside, something you don't do anymore, right? Or like you always have a hovering parent these days, that's tracking their child on an app. I mean, most of the time I'd recommend a leash more than an app, but whatever. But I'm very fond of which, I think when it kind of dawned on me, and then, the fall of communism came, and we still didn't get a lot of stuff. I think when I was in studying, that's kind of where it really hit me. We used to go to Piotrkowska, and there was I still remember this store is called the 99 Dragons, which is, if you think about now, it's like a dollar store. It's the most amazing, the most useless tchotchkes. But it was fun because Piotrkowska was being finally renovated. Those houses were being painted. I have only, and I fell in love with the history of Łódź. I worked as a tour guide for the London Business School when they used to come to Łódź, and I just love the city. I loved its energy. I love the fact that you don't have to be a fourth generation or fifth generation or first generation Warsaw person, right? To finally fit in. It's not stuck up. It's a city where everybody's embraced. It's a very, very odd city, but I like it. I really, really, really like it.
So, when was it that you actually realized that you do like history? And
Oh,
why? Or
always.
how?
You know what? My mom said so we grew up in the way we used to do it. I would go with my dad to church. My mom had like an hour and a half off for herself. Then we would come back, we would eat lunch. And then there were two options. We would do the dishes, and there was 1 hour of, if we didn't go anywhere, it was 1 hour of silence, and then we listened to music for 1 hour, and then we would watch Pieprzy Vanilla, this kind of like salt and vanilla, this kind of traveling around the world, around different cultures and interesting places, documentary by this mixed couple. Now, the other option was we would go to my Nana and we would watch it there, or we would go on road trips. And I just loved history. So my mom said, I was fascinated by the Incas, by the Mayas, by the dynasties. I would Egypt. Oh my God. So for my 9th birthday, they took me. There was a great exhibit in Muzeum Narodowe, the National Museum, about Palmyra, about the work of Kazimierz Michałowski in Palmyra. And I still have the catalog that I got. And I made my mom. We went to the mummies, and there was one mummy, and I'm sure it's still there. It looks like Jerzy Urban. I swear to God.
Who is Jerzy Urban for
Jerzy
our
Urban is like the
listeners?
ex-communist spokesperson during the not a very pleasant man, incredibly intelligent, but not a pleasant man. Um, he kind of served as the spokesperson during the martial law, and he's like this great kind of flappy ears. Dumbo almost didn't have them compared to him. And I kid you not, there is a mummy in the Warsaw National Museum that has his ears. And apparently, being 9 years old and having no filter already, I said very loudly, "Look, Mom, it's Urban."
What was the reaction?
Everybody laughed. Like Poland was, it was I think 86 or 87. It's yeah.
Still not at the very end of
Yeah.
communism.
Well,
Still.
but yeah, I know, but like nobody really liked him, and I was a child, so.
Well, so you went then to Kuwait. Why did your family go to Kuwait? For what reason? So far
So,
away.
again, it was 1980s, and my dad decided that, they worked as academics, and they were not, my dad was kind of stalled because he wasn't a member of the party, the Communist Party. He never was. And so he decided that it's a good time to earn some money. And after one other project didn't fell through, he went to Kuwait, and it was a good exchange rate. And it's and then my mom joined him, and then I joined him, and I went to the American School of Kuwait. So that was pretty good. It was an interesting, very different culture. And of course, I read up a little bit on it before I was going. I read up, about like all this great Middle Eastern and Andalus culture. I had this idea of, very tolerant and liberal societies. Well, that came crushing down. Although the Kuwaitis were loveliest people, but no alcohol. They would censor newspapers. They would delete Israel and delete Tel Aviv with a black marker because that made it disappear, right? I mean, if there was like a newspaper in the Times where there's a woman with too much cleavage, the cleavage was also with a black marker marked down.
I think
And
they
my
still
dad would
do
always
it.
joke, well, there's some mullah who got very aroused. You know, yeah,
I think
yeah.
they still probably do it in
No, I
some
think
of the
now after the
newspapers.
first Gulf War, when the Palestinians backed Saddam Hussein, Kuwait is fine. But for
I see.
example, it couldn't be called Persian Gulf, so that also had to be, it was called the Arabic Gulf. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think so, sweeties. Like, yeah, no, it's been the Persian Gulf for a long time. Like, you got to let that dream go.
And how was the school there? You're still a school child at the time, I suppose.
So the American school, and then after the invasion was the Kuwait English school, were very good, because they were based on Western, Western curricula. The teachers were quite, they were also quite well paid. You had mainly children of expats there or of Kuwaitis who either their children wanted to study and go on a study abroad, or, they had money. So I still remember one of my, I had some incredibly bright Kuwaiti friends, absolutely. But I also remember one guy who during the exam wrote in his name, wrote in his thing, put his hand and slept through the exam, like he didn't care.
Well, probably they could afford it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And then you came back to Poland.
So in between, there was like a school in England because remember, there's the first Gulf War.
Yes.
Then, and then I come back to Poland. I go to 26th High School.
How old were you at the time?
Oh God, I must have been 16, yes. 26th High School, which I adore. I still love. It's still the best high school ever. I still have friends from it. They're just fantastic. They're just fantastic.
So how did you continue developing your, well, sentiment for history? Or did you even?
No, of course. I mean, I took part in the Olimpiada Historyczna. I kept
Historical
on,
Olympiad?
yeah. So it's like the history
Olympics, which
contest all
means
across Poland. Yeah. It was, I did pretty good. The history teacher that was responsible for it taught my brother, who, how do I put this? He is my exact opposite. He's a jock, straight, doesn't believe in God, and is a computer programmist and doesn't talk. So, like, my dad has managed to produce two opposite polars, which he always liked to. He's like, I have no idea how this came about. I'm like, this is fun.
nature.
Indeed, but she couldn't believe that I was my brother's brother. Like, she's like, oh my God, and you like history? I'm like, yeah. She's like, unbelievable. Unbelievable.
And then you finished high school. Was there still military service that you were supposed to take in Poland at the time, or that was no longer the
No, so I mean, I
case?
figured, yes, you're right. I was called, I was drafted, I had to go to the conscription office, but because, I knew I was going to go and study, I knew that that's going to be deferred. So, not that I didn't fret. My dad also made sure that I was stressed enough. He was like, Davoya, tas Davoya. He would sing, while shaving. I'm like, it's not funny. For those of you who do not know, the song is like, it's time to go to the military, mother. It's time to go to the military. Like, it's not funny. But I did go, and I took the exam to the Polish to Wydział Prawa, so the law faculty of the University of Lodz, and I got the second best grade, oddly enough. And this is a funny story because I have to tell you, I was thinking, I'm talking to my good friend, and I'm like, I'm pretty hoping that the guy who got 2 points more than I did is, this kind of like dorky looking, podgy, I don't know, somebody. And the guy was a cross between Hugh Grant and George Clooney. I'm like, man, not only is he smart, but also good looking. Crap. But I got in, and interesting enough, during my first year of law school, I also submitted my first article for publication, historical.
And then we need to talk about it. So tell me, what is the connection between law and history? Why law?
Well,
Why
I
not
mean,
history?
when you study law, you also have to study the history of law. It didn't, there was no
History of law,
connection.
yes.
My parents convinced me that if I study history period, remember this is early 1990, like it's 1996, 1997 when I'm getting into law school. Unemployment is through the roof. And they said, you will not find a job as a historian. They're like, you need to find a good job. Now, interesting enough, I already wanted to be a pastor back then, but I had a conversation with my nana. And I told her, like, well, I want to be a pastor. And she's like, oh, sweetie. I'm like, but I'm kind of gay. And by kind of I mean 100%, right? So and she's like, well, I don't think the churches are ready here in Poland, maybe in the West. So she said, what is the way in which you could have your passion for history, your passion for helping people use the best way? So she and my parents convinced me to study law. So that's kind of how it went. Yeah.
And then you finished law and
Yes, well, there was an interlude in Nijmegen, right? So there was an interlude in Nijmegen because it was the Erasmus exchange. We went, yes. And so then I finished law and I was in love very, as my life is always tends to be unrequited love. And again, this is 2001. It's before Poland joins the EU. Even though I had excellent grades, I could not get into a PhD program here at the University of Lodz. There were other people lined up for that year, which did not end up well, but that's a whole other story. And so when I was in Nijmegen, my professors from refugee
you
law,
went
Thomas
there for
Heidelberg.
Erasmus program, I suppose.
Yes. So in the Netherlands. And so my professor for refugee law said, Kaz, you're really good. Your analytical skills and your oral skills, as an oralist and, argumentative are very good. Have you thought of doing a PhD? So I said, okay. So, I had no option. So I applied to the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. And to everybody's surprise, I got the job. And so I did 5 years. So I moved to Amsterdam just after Easter of 2002, because I remember that. Just after Easter of 2002.
So 24 years ago, almost to the
24
day.
years ago. Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Indeed. And Amsterdam was, so my boss was fantastic. I had a phenomenal colleague, Sarah, my other boss, Ben Vermolen, Sarah van Valsum, sadly, she died. My roommate was this incredibly bright, and she's now a professor, Britta van Beers. She was she was not only gorgeous and funny, but incredibly intelligent and friendly. So she helped me navigate certain stuff. So I loved my time in Amsterdam. Part of it was I went as a visiting researcher to Harvard because probably so when I moved to Amsterdam, I was like, I need to join a church, right? Again, because that's what I do. So I thought like, oh, I'm going to go to the Church of England. Well, their church was quite conservative. So I went finally to my own, which is an English-speaking church. It's part of the Dutch Reformed and the Church of Scotland, and it was wonderful. And the pastor there, John Cowie, was great. But this is like a tangent, so I can get to you. Within 3 months, he took me for a coffee after worship and after church coffee, and he said, "So, what about this cult of ministry of yours?" I'm like, he's good. And they said, well, John, there's this teeny tiny problem that I'm gay. He's like, no, everybody knows that, Kaz. I'm like, okay, fair enough. I said, well, what about the church? He said, He said, I think you would be surprised how many clergy are gay. And so probably halfway through my PhD, I already knew that once I finished, I will go on and study and become a pastor. But I enjoyed my PhD immensely, I have to say. And I love the Netherlands, with their very rational, straight, but very honest attitude towards everything. My nana said you always were direct and had no inhibitions, but you blossomed in the Netherlands.
Well, that's what I like about the Dutch culture, that people are direct and you know what to expect from them.
Yeah. And they're friendly, and they really are friendly. They have a great sense of humor. We used to joke that they're Germans with a sense of humor, just not to their face because they took offense at the German part. But, other than that, it was great.
Let us get back to history. So everything you told us for now was actually about law. Where does history become part of your academic life?
Well, like I said, I published my first article in 1999, right? And
1999.
1999, yeah. In
1989.
Oh God, no, not that fast, but 1989, and it was in Odrodzenie Reformacja w Polsce.
Oh, it's a very famous journal of which I am now member of the scientific board.
Oh, well done. Well, as you know, I publish a lot in it.
What do we call it in English? This kind of
Reformation and Renaissance in Poland.
Yes.
Yeah. So so I published there my first was in 1999. It was thanks to Professor Kikseisen, who was at Professor Stasbier, who were both very nice. They sent me with a lot of corrections, but they published the piece. And while I was in the Netherlands, I used to sightsee. So I would go and see all these churches, all these places, and I decided to write my first book. It took a little bit longer, but I did. And I think in 2013 came out the book, which is called The Wolves and the Tender Lambs of Christ, the Wielkie Łagodne Jagniątka Chrystusa. It's about the establishment of the Dutch Reformed Church. And again, I was like publishing while I was there. I published in Church History Journal. And I was getting good feedback on some of the publications, even though I was not always, it's very interesting because one of the things that I keep on hearing from Polish historians, like, well, you do not have the Warsztat of a historian, which nobody has ever told me in the West.
Two skill set. I heard that. I heard the term in the Netherlands too.
Yeah. I've never heard that, even when I published in the Netherlands. I've never heard that. I found, at least in some ways, and again, I don't want to do broad strokes, but I've never heard that abroad. Like that's not something they would say. That's not something that would come out the first thing they would say, which tends to be in Poland. But I found, I've met some wonderful professor, even, in University of Lodz, Professor Anusik, who's been very helpful, when I emailed him a couple of times. But, I found some very nice historians in Poland who, if I ask, they will respond and they will help. And I always try to return the favor because, again, throughout my life, academic and career-wise, I was helped by a lot of people. So if people, they just showed me kindness, I would, I'm thinking of writing this book completely off the subject that I'm normally writing just to cleanse my palette. And I wrote to this very famous professor and I said, I'm trying to find out this article and I can't. And she just sent it to me in PDF and he said, good luck, it's such an interesting topic. Go for it. So I always try to, return the favor. Also, when I write reviews, I try not to be snappy. And I remember that's also part of the things that I think I was taught both at the Free University and at Yale, that, when you offer criticism, you always offer first 3 points that you like, that are valuable, and what this work can, gives. And they said, a review is not an exercise in sarcasm. It's not an exercise in what you would like to read about, but the author chose to write about something different. He said, that's not really a review. That's your opinion of what you would like to read about, which nobody is interested in, right? So other than you. And your spouse, if they're in a captive audience. So it's an interesting way. So yeah, so throughout both my law part and then theology, my second degree in theology, you have to write a thesis at Yale. And they suggested that I write a thesis on the development of the Polish Reformed communion liturgy. So I delved in, and as I delved in, I delved even more into the Polish synods. And when I finished, my supervisor, Bruce Gordon and Brian Spink, said, you should really write a book about Polish Reformation, about the Polish Calvinists, because they said you're fluent in English, you're fluent in Polish, you write well. And they said, this is something, and I had a different perspective, which is always appreciated. And this very well, right? Like in the West, they like to have new perspectives. Whether it's right or wrong, it's immaterial in terms of it always engenders a little bit of a debate, right, among historians. And so I would just put it this way, that when the book came out with Brill in 2020, there was a markedly different, although not universally, there was a markedly different attitude towards the book among Western scholars and some Polish scholars, and then some other Polish scholars, which is interesting. It's just interesting to observe. As Poles like to think of themselves, but Poles are very, I think, living abroad, I think Poles are very insular, and they really, we have a lot of these people made of marble, and you just cannot touch them, and I don't know. It's as a Calvinist, I find idols always increasingly funny and interesting at the same time. It's like, why would you elevate this to a dogma, right? Both in terms of history, society, and stuff like that. Why? What, as my professor of theology used to say, the idol is, what are you afraid of? Because the idol is supposed to cover something.
Sure. But then the question is,
Yeah.
why didn't you pursue career in the academia?
Because my primary calling is calling to be a pastor. And I love to teach, and by the way, remember, every Sunday I get up and teach. In the Reformed tradition, I'm called to be a pastor and teacher of the congregation. And I do teach at the Evangelical-Reformed Szkoła Teologiczna, Evangelical School of Theology in Wrocław. I do teach now a second semester of classes at the Artes Liberales. If I were to come to Poland, I would love to teach history too. I think my group is such a little niche thing. I wouldn't step on anybody's toes. I have a pretty good grasp of Western church history. And I do like teaching it because, a lot of things I can explain, what happens in church, but also what happens in society, right? Can be explained by that kind of synergy and also, push and pull situation. But my primary vocation really is to be a pastor. And yeah.
So in fact, you are a good example of how one can be a pastor or perhaps doing some other kind of job, but still pursue interest in history in your own free time, and I suppose also at your own expense, in fact.
Mostly at my own expense. I had an experience of should I say this or not? Let me just say I applied for funding, and it's very, very interesting where I got 2 reviews, and I could tell you which one is from which country. And
By the style.
the non-Polish one was interesting subject, great guy, I think he can do it, da 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 da. The Polish one was, well, he's not a professional academic. He's never led a program like this. And I'm like, well, it's very hard to lead a program like this if you don't give the grant. But I think, yes. And for, very often, I don't know people in academia. I know them because, like with you emailed me or I emailed you and we kept in touch. And, if people email me and they're very, very friendly, of course I will help them. Why isn't, I don't see this as a competition in terms of, we all have something to contribute. But most of the time, I've never gotten any scholarship or any funding from the Polish government whatsoever. I found an interesting subject and I thought, okay, surely the embassy is going to cough up. And it wasn't even for me, for this project, for the first woman pastor ever ordained ever in the world. She has an unmarked grave. And I said, could we pay for her grave? I think it was like $1,500. The embassy in the US had no money, but it has all this money to promote all this nonsense. The only scholarships I seem to be getting are Western ones. When, again, in the West, they don't look at you whether you're an independent scholar or affiliated with a university. They look, are you good? Is your work good? And, and very often they're explicit. Independent researchers are welcome to apply. Whereas in Poland is, at least from my perspective, and I don't want to burn any bridges because I know it's not always the way, but the number of times I think 4 or 3 times I applied, it was always a no. Again, with a Polish fund, my book was now translated into Polish, and I applied, and Mr. Radziwiłł was incredibly gracious in terms of both answering quickly and agreeing to be one of the co-sponsors with the Wydawnictwo Naukowe Semper, with the publishing house. And so my book is now translated into Polish. And then it's like, do you want to apply for, to the Polish government? I'm like, I'm not going to get it. I'm not going to get it. I don't write, I don't know anybody. I don't write about 20th century, and I don't write about Roman Catholics. So it's over.
So you say that being a non-mainstream historian can pose a problem for
I'm not sure if
a
it's a problem.
development
It's
of
a little
a
tougher.
career.
Yeah, it is a little tougher because, I see people whose So one of the things that was like, well, he doesn't attend conferences. Well, here's the deal. When you're an independent researcher, it's very hard to attend a conference, right? Because first you have to pay the fees, pay the registration fees, pay traveling, pay housing costs. Whereas, I see some of my colleagues, and quite rightly so, and don't get me wrong, I do not begrudge it. I think the state should pay for academics. But you have to understand, if you're an independent researcher, your ability to attend conferences is limited on your own dime. So when you rate that, well, I don't think this person is good for the project because he hasn't attended academic conferences, that's really not a good argument. Quite honestly. So if you want to be an independent researcher, I would say by all means do it. But, just know that some of the researchers, some of the opportunities will be limited. On the other hand, you are free, so to speak, free as a bird.
I do hope that one day you will write that article about Polish Huguenots. Still looking forward to it.
Yes, but but here's the thing. I need to find somebody to sponsor me so I can go to Berlin, open that archives. Probably now with the iPhone, it won't take as long to take photos of the book. So, whereas probably 20 years ago or 10 years ago when we started emailing, that would have been, probably a 7-day stay, right? But even now, you know this very well, and all historians know this. I'm preparing a book about missions to Polish immigrants, Protestant missions to Polish immigrants in America. So I got 2 very generous scholarships from the Congregational Library, the Presbyterian Historical Society, but some of the materials were in Louisiana, so New Orleans. I went there on my own dime. Fine. Then I also got a very nice, generous one from Ohio because I found out that there are certain things in Ohio. But then there was another one in Minnesota. I also went there and I'm seeing them, and it's 15 boxes. I thought out of those 15 boxes, when I looked at the scan, I was like, I'm probably going to need 3. Well, again, people there were very, very helpful. And I also want to do a shout out to Polish people in Polish archives. They tend to be wonderfully helpful. Because they said, well, you can only apply on this day and we will give you the manuscripts tomorrow. And I said, look, lady, I'm here for a week from America. Could you help me out? And they universally help you out. But out of the 4,
that's true.
But I had a flexible ticket in terms of Louisiana but in Minnesota, I did not. I had 5 days to look at the archives. And on day 3, I realized I might not have enough time. So that's the thing, so if I want to really write the thing about the Huguenots in Gdansk, but I need to go to Berlin, hotel, transport, food. So I would like you to recommend to either read the book Calvinism in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, 1548 to 1648. It's in English in Brill, and there's now a Polish edition.
In Brill, I just want to stress that Kaz, even though he claims that he's not a super professional historian, published in Brill, which is double peer-reviewed and has very strict criteria for publishing.
Thank you. Yeah, it's in the St. Andrews Reformation Studies History, and so thank you. So I published that. So it's there. If you want the Polish version, it's in the Wydawnictwo Naukowe Semper. Calvinism also very nicely. It's a slightly different version. It doesn't have the introduction to what the Polish Commonwealth was, but it has some of the responses to some of the reviews I received. And then it's especially kind of geared more towards the Polish audience. But I recommend it.
We will put links in the description.
Please do.
So,
and my
thank
love
you.
to University of Łódź. I'm very glad to see how you guys are expanding, and congratulations, Michael, on your appointment.
Thank you.
I'm very proud of my alma mater. So,
thank you.
Yeah, you go, Łódź.
Thank you very much.